Welcome to the Exam Study Expert Podcast, helping you ace your exams at school and university through the psychology of high performance and the science of studying smarter, not harder. It's my pleasure to introduce your host, the Cambridge-trained memory psychologist and exam success coach, William Wadsworth.
Hello and welcome to the Exam Study Expert Podcast, which at least some of you might be seeing as a video cast this week. So if you're watching the video, hello! If you're just listening but would like to see the video version, see details in the episode description. Today is all about what to do the day before an exam. It's exam taking season for quite a few of you at the moment, I know. So I wanted to offer a relatively brief set of thoughts today on the things I suggest doing the day before you're due to sit an exam to set you up for success. I've kept it deliberately short today, so hopefully it makes it nice and easy to find at least a few minutes to take this in, even amidst a relatively busy exam season. So let's get started. In at number 1, retest yourself. So I talk a lot about the power of spaced retrieval practice. See episode 66 of the Exam Study Expert Podcast if you need a reminder or an introduction. But essentially, retrieval practice means pulling knowledge out of memory, so testing yourself in some way. And that being a really, really powerful way to consolidate memory and get knowledge to stick. And spacing simply means spacing out that practice over time. For some reason, people sometimes assume that when you get to the day before an exam, you probably want to stop doing retrieval practice and switch to just reading stuff through. But maybe either they're hoping that it'll just stick in short-term memory rather, when they look at it the day before because it's such a short time to go. Or maybe it's something about the pressures you feel under when it gets that close to an exam that means you sort of fall back on old habits that may be less effective. Honestly, even right up to the day before an exam itself, I still recommend sticking to what's most effective. Stick to doing the retrieval practice. It never stops being the best way to get knowledge to stick in memory. So what do you actually do? Well, if you've been making something like flashcards as part of your revision, now is the perfect time for a final round of testing on the flashcards you've made. For a short course or a course with a relatively light knowledge load, so there's not too much you need to know, maybe just a short set of formulas for a maths paper, for example, and such that you've got a set of flashcards that's relatively manageable, you might be able to even run through and test yourself on all the flashcards for that exam. Might take you an hour or two. That would be a great way to spend an hour or two the day before an exam. A final round to make sure you're really solid on all the details you need to know for that paper. And as always, if you didn't get any right, you might do a final round of retesting just on the handful of cards that you didn't get right first time of asking to give yourself a little bit of extra practice where you need it most. For those of you with larger volumes of material, it's simply not practical to test yourself on all flashcards. Some of my clients taking advanced professional exams that we, in our coaching work, medics taking their specialist board exams, for example, for some of them, it might take many, many days to test themselves on all of their flashcards just once through. So in the case of having more flashcards than is practical to test in just an hour or two, I would suggest prioritizing. So for example, you could either pick out a topic or two that's particularly challenging for you, and just focus on the flashcards on that topic or chapter. Or if you've been marking out cards that you keep getting wrong as you've been going, for example, by folding over the corner of a physical flashcard or perhaps starring or favoriting a card in a tool like Quizlet, then you might simply go through your cards that are marked as particularly challenging the day before the exam. So don't try and do everything, just focus on the ones that you keep getting wrong in the past. What if you haven't made flashcards? Well, you might try some blank page retrieval instead. So take a tricky topic or two and write out everything you can remember about it on paper from memory. Then you check your notes and see if you've remembered all the key points. Add in any additions or corrections in a second colour, and then perhaps repeat the whole exercise again, challenging yourself to remember more of what you missed. for the second time through. So a final little thought on this first point about retesting yourself to really make sure you're as solid as possible on what you need to know for the exam. And this particularly goes out to anyone that's feeling, especially nervous or anxious for the test. I might modify my advice a little bit if the anxiety levels are rising quite high for you. In that case, it might be more beneficial for you to focus on doing some retrieval practice. So still do the testing, but perhaps you might focus deliberately on parts of the course that you know reasonably well. So parts of the course that you are quite happy with. So perhaps the basics or the fundamentals that are very likely to come up, and give yourself a little bit of extra practice on that. And the goal here is particularly to try and reassure you and build your confidence that you do know what you're doing by looking at some of the parts of the course that are a bit more straightforward for you, reassuring you, boosting your confidence. So that's number one. Number two is doing your warm-ups. So the second thing I recommend doing are some exam-style warm-up activities. Get your exam answering brain on by reminding yourself of what real exam questions look like. If you have a relatively short exam paper, say an hour or less, you might attempt a full paper. As always, to get the most out of exam practice, try it from memory first and resist the temptation to look little bits up in your notes until the end. If you do have access to the mark scheme, finish off the exercise by checking what you put against the model answers and pay close attention to what scored you marks and especially what caused you to miss marks. If your paper is getting a little bit longer, so 2-3 hours, maybe even more, you might not want to do a whole paper the day before the exam. It takes a lot out of you to sit a big paper. And we want to make sure you're fresh and you've got some energy left in the tank for the real thing itself the following day. So what you might do here, rather than sit through a whole big 3-hour paper and exhaust yourself, you might simply maybe take a selection of questions, perhaps a couple from each section, so you get a nice feel for all the different kinds of questions that you'll be facing tomorrow. Or an alternative strategy, and particularly relevant if you have longer written answers in your exam, so almost like exam-style essays, if you like. You don't have to write up a full essay in neat. You might want to try the top and tail technique. So the process of writing an exam-style essay or a longer written answer, those 15, 18, 24 mark questions, often think of that in two parts. So the first part is planning out your answer in rough, brainstorming all the points you want to include. And then the second part is writing up your answer in neat. And I'd suggest focusing on practicing on the planning stage. So the first stage, the brainstorming all the points you want to include, and not worrying too much about the writing up in neat step for your practice, your warm-up practice the day before the exam. And that's because the day is won or lost on the strength of your essay plan, because that's where you do all the heavy work of brainstorming what you're going to include, trying to recall all the important points, deciding how you'll structure your argument. And once you've got a great plan, a great essay will surely follow. Plus, writing an essay plan, it is in of itself a great way to do retrieval practice, particularly in heavily knowledge-based subjects. You can still compare your plan to the mark scheme, if one's available, to learn lessons about what you could have included, what you might want to do differently, any analysis points you might have included differently. So you could practice planning a handful of different essay questions in rough, and then to finish, maybe write perhaps a couple of introductions and conclusions in neat. So write full paragraphs for kind of a couple of introductions and conclusion sections, just to kind of get back into the feel and get your English language writing brain switched on, topping and tailing, as I say. If your exam is, the one exception to all this would be if your exam is, heavily weighted towards the quality of like your English writing. So it's, a piece of creative writing, and there's a big score for the quality of your sentences themselves. That's when I might change my advice a little bit and suggest you focus a little bit more on the actual writing the day before the exam as part of your warm-up. Essentially, all we're trying to do in this second part is make sure we get some practice, get yourself warmed up, back in the zone for the kinds of questions you're going to be facing tomorrow. So you feel nice and fresh on those kinds of questions when you get into that exam. The third thing I suggest is to remind yourself of the rubric. So take a moment to refresh your memory of what an exam looks like. Make sure you understand how many point parts or sections there are, what you need to do in each one, how much time you're going to allocate to each section. Is there a choice of questions at any point? How many questions should you choose to write on? It's simple stuff. It's the basics. But if you slip up on, say, I don't know, there's a section that has a choice of 10 questions and you're only supposed to write answers on one of them, and you end up doing it on all 10, that's going to cost you big in the exam. So do double check all of this on the day itself, just to make sure nothing's changed the year you're taking the exam. But I would also suggest refreshing your memory on what you're almost certainly going to be facing the day before the exam as part of your final prep the day before. And while you're at it, why not triple check when and where the exam is? Make sure you know how you're going to get there with plenty of time to spare. So there's no stress in getting to the exam on time. Number 4, check your kit. Make sure you've got everything you need ready to go for the exam. Exam pencil case, calculator if you need one, with spare batteries just in case, an ID card or your school university card if you need one. Any other special kit you need for that exam, like a geometry set, a ruler, art materials, a water bottle, all laid out, ready to go, so you don't have any surprises in the morning. And then number 5, stop early. Perhaps the most important tip of all, stop work early, way early. Don't work late into the evening the day before an exam. Plan to have a nice early bedtime, and at an absolute minimum, I highly suggest putting your books away, forgetting about it all, at least 2 hours before bedtime and enjoying a relaxing wind-down routine. So you could watch a bit of something calming on TV, maybe have a stroll outside and get some summer evening air. Take a warm bath if that helps you unwind. Brew a soothing warm drink, nothing caffeinated, so a herbal tea or something, and curl up with a calming or escapist fiction book. Not everyone's going to sleep brilliantly in exam season with all those nerves rattling around, but by knocking off work in plenty of time, you give yourself the best chance of getting a better rest and a decent night's sleep than you would if you were frantically cramming through to 10 p.m. So those are our 5 big suggestions for you the day before your exam. So do the basics, retest yourself, particularly on the key bits of information that you're a bit rocky on the day before the exam, to give yourself the best chance of knowing it in the exam. 2, do your warm-ups, so attempt some exam-style questions or just do the topping and tailing essay plans, so you're back in the zone of what kinds of questions are going to come up. Number 3, remind yourself of what the exam looks like, what the rubric, what the format is. Number 4, check your kit, make sure everything's ready to go. And number 5, put it all away nice and early in the evening. Don't work late, so you get a decent rest ahead of the exam. Exam day will dawn and you will be formidable. Wishing you every success. You've got this. A little final coda from me. If you've got exams coming up, I would highly suggest checking out my new course, Outsmart Your Exams Live, the little-known secrets to maximise your mark when it matters most, in the exam hall itself. You'll be given tickets to a live exam planning workshop where we'll sort out your game plan and all sorts of other bits and bobs that are super helpful in terms of planning for exam success. And you'll also have access to a series of on-demand, bite-sized tips videos, my favourite little hints and secrets for getting you the biggest mark possible in the exam itself. That's all available at examstudyexpert.com/exam success. Do check that out if you're interested in my new exam technique mark maximizing course, Outsmart Your Exams Live. That's over at examstudyexpert.com/exam success. Wishing you every success, as always, in your studies and in your upcoming exams. You've got this.